Abraham Verghese is a doctor at Stanford University, but he's also a writer, and he's given us an intriguing new novel entitled Cutting for Stone, in which he dramatizes the great themes of human existence: love and betrayal, forgiveness, self-sacrifice, and the inextricable union of life and death. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list, and there are many book clubs around the country that are presently reading it. Doctors and surgeons will like it a lot. Those of us who are not doctors or surgeons might find some of the information a little bit too much for us, but we can skip across that. The novel unfolds along 5 decades from India to Ethiopia and finally ends up in New York City and Boston. And Verghese uses the field he knows best, medicine, to make a very important point. And the point is this: that it's all too easy for all of us to neglect the human. There's a wonderful scene in the book that takes place in the hospital where the attending surgeon is teaching his new residents. And he tells his residents, these young doctors, about a letter he received from an anguished mother whose son had just died at the hospital. And the mother in this letter thanks the doctors for their attempts to save her son, but she shares with him the anguish that she felt when she was rushed out of the room, leaving her son alone and terrified, anxious and frightened. Now, everyone in the trauma room was doing their job in a most efficient way, but this anguished mother felt that her son's emotional pain, her son's heart, was not dealt with. Now, any of us who have had any experience in trauma rooms in hospitals understand the intensity of what goes on in those situations. But in the novel, Dr. Stone uses this letter and this experience to teach his young doctors, to encourage them not to forget the human. And in his teaching, he asks a very interesting question. He says to these young doctors, what treatment in an emergency is administered by ear? Only one of the young doctors knew the answer. And the answer is simple: words of comfort. Dr. Stone was making a very important point, that we can have all the technology in the world, that we can be extremely efficient in what we do, but sometimes our technology and our efficiency allow us to sidestep engaging the heart, allow us to neglect the heart. And the psalmist that we just sung, the psalm we just sung with Susan this morning, sort of exemplifies that in our readings today, the hardening of our hearts to what's human. And that's the challenge of the weekend. Harden not your hearts. And it's also the underlying theme, it's the bottom line to this whole weekend, which is about respect life, the right to life. In our very fast-paced, technologically advanced civilization where efficiency is king, we can harden or fail to engage, to open our hearts to human suffering, to the unborn, to the aged, to the sick, to those with disabilities, to those who are hungry, to those around the world who have had their human rights taken away from them. Isn't it amazing that at this time in history, women are still being stoned to death for adultery in some countries? And isn't it interesting that our use of capital punishment offers the tragic illusion that we can teach that killing is wrong by killing? Now, the vast majority of democratic countries in Europe and Latin America over the last 50 years have abolished capital punishment. But here in the United States, most democracies in Asia, and almost all totalitarian governments have not. Now, in Verghese's novel, we experience the violence that we heard about in the first reading today. The novel takes place during the reign of Haile Selassie in Ethiopia during the 1960s. And that's an era that was crippled by poverty and hunger and authoritarian rule. But in the midst of the violence, there's a small hospital where doctors and nurses and sisters value all human life and become true healers. And these healers at what is called Missing Hospital see and experience the strife and the clamorous discord that's all around them, but they don't let their hearts be hardened. They don't sidestep engaging the human. They don't neglect the heart. And they struggle with all of their energy to relieve human suffering. It's interesting, the author, Abraham Verghese, tells us that in writing this novel, what he wants us, the reader, to experience is that how entering medicine for him was a passionate quest, a romantic pursuit, a spiritual calling, a privileged yet hazardous undertaking. And yet, in the midst of it, he sees that today it's so easy for the patient to become invisible and simply exist on a computer. So in the novel, he criticizes, he's an American, he criticizes our society as being artful and lavish, disposable everything, lucrative, incredibly effective. An interesting point for all of us to reflect upon. Has our progress and technology tempted us to sidestep and neglect the human? Verghese might be writing a novel about medicine, but it challenges all of us. In science, where the human can be discarded, in religion, where some groups believe that God allows the killing of apostates, in advertising, where the consumer can be exploited by needs being created in order to maximize corporate and individual profit. And of course, we can go on into law, into education, into the media. You know, I'm sure all of us, in all of our vocations, entered into them as Verghese described his entrance into medicine, as a passionate quest, a romantic pursuit, a spiritual calling, privileged yet hazardous at times, because we can all so easily be sidestepped by the many forces that work against us today. Every day we know that decisions are made that go against human life. And all of us gathered here today are certainly all very much aware of the major issues that challenge human life: abortion, stem cell research, capital punishment, the end-of-life issues. But in the midst of all of those major issues, there are so many ways on a daily, mundane basis that we as a culture, by the decisions we make or the decisions we fail to make, show that we have forgotten the value of human life. Just to list a few: driving while drunk, texting or using our cell phones when we drive, becoming absorbed with road rage for minor incidents. And the list can go on. And some of us have forgotten the value of our own human life. The body is supposed to be a temple, and yet sometimes we exercise too little, we eat too much, we drink too much, we stay up too late, and we abuse our bodies and we abuse our souls in many different ways, not valuing ourselves. And then we place tremendous burdens on society to take care of us. And should we not be concerned? Should we not be concerned about the tremendous amount of violence on TV and the movies that show no value or dignity to human life? and the impact that this form of media has on our young people. And we do perpetuate this cycle by allowing children to watch TV and movies that express this tremendous violence and do not honor human life. This weekend, as we challenge one another to respect life, we have many new technologies that have brought us tremendous progress. But it might just be good to slow down and ask ourselves whether just because we can do something, should we? And if the answer is that we should, then we need to keep the value and the dignity of every human life in the forefront. Abraham Verghese uses the world of medicine to challenge our technologically advanced culture. We are efficient. We can stop life, we can end life, we can clone life, and we can put things on the web. We can put things on Facebook that can embarrass us and that can destroy people's lives. And we just saw that happen this week with that young Rutgers University student who committed suicide. So with all of this advancement that we share, which is so wonderful in so many ways, are we at times losing sight of the value of who we are as relational human beings? Let me just go back to that question that in the novel, Dr. Stone asks those young residents. What treatment in an emergency is administered by ear? Words of comfort.